Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the innovation stage. We are thrilled to have you and thrilled for our next session. Today, we've got Steve Maclaughlin joining us, and we're going to cover such an important topic, privacy in the age of AI. If you've joined other sessions today, if you know about fundraising AI, we obviously care deeply about maintaining trust. It's so important for us to be able to, as organizations and nonprofits, to be able to build trust with donors, build trust with communities, and a lot of that will come down to how we manage our data and what that looks like. So, really excited to have Steve join us today. Steve is the Senior Vice President of Product at Global and best-selling author of Data-Driven Nonprofits. Steve has more than 20 years of experience collaborating with nonprofits, government institutions, technology companies, all in the name of driving innovation and maximizing mission impact. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Steve today, and we can't wait for the session. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Great, Jen. Thanks for that introduction and appreciate everyone joining us here. I think we're the last session of today, but as Jen said, really important topic here that we're going to try and cover. We have a limited amount of time, but I'm going to try and cover as much ground as we can here on the whole topic of privacy in the age of AI. So, as Jen said, I'm Steve Maclaughlin and worked with for a number of years in the nonprofit sector and have a lot of experience dealing with data, privacy, security, those types of concerns. And this was a topic that we wanted to make sure we covered as a part of today's event. So um, I like to think about this topic of privacy using the Spider-Man rule, which is with great power comes great responsibility. You know, our organizations have and deal with a tremendous amount of data. And with that great data comes great responsibility, in particular around these issues around privacy and security when it comes to data. I like to break these things into two different distinct categories because they are different, right? So when we're talking about data privacy as compared to data security, there are some important differences here. So first, when we're talking about data privacy, we're talking about rights and consent. When we're talking about things from a data security perspective, that's about protection and defense. Key distinctions here. Again, with data privacy, we're really focused on controlling who has access to personal information and how is that data used. Data security tends to focus more on how do we protect that data from unauthorized access, breaches, cyber threats, those types of things. This next piece is really important as well. So data privacy is governed by regulations like GDPR, CCPA, and HIPAA, depending on the verticals in which your organization operates. Data security tends to fall into more technical standards like ISO 27001, NIST, and SOC 2 compliance. Data privacy is implemented through policies, consent mechanisms, data minimization practices, and user controls. Data security, on the other hand, is implemented through technical measures like encryption, access controls, and intrusion detection systems. And then finally, data privacy violations typically result in regulatory fines, legal action from individuals, and reputational damage to your organization. Data security breaches can lead to data theft, financial losses, operational disruption, and potential exposure of sensitive information. So again, with great data comes great responsibility. We're going to focus on this data privacy piece of the picture, but I think it's equally important that everyone also understands data security is probably the other side of the coin that you need to take into consideration as well. Okay, so when we're talking about data privacy, one of the things I think is always very important as a first step for any organization is to understand where are you today. We know that some organizations may be very mature in their practices around data privacy, and we also know some organizations are just getting started or haven't really put policies or procedures into place. And so that's why it is so important to sort of think about where are you today. Um, and when we think about a data privacy maturity model, There's sort of four different levels here. Level one would be a reacting model, right? You're maybe hitting the panic button. Oh, we got to quickly react to something. Um, Oftentimes, you're trying to beg, borrow, steal resources to get things done. Level two on a maturity model is anticipating. This is something that's important. It's something you've got to do. And so you're starting to think about, okay, how can I see the connections between the work that we're doing in the organization today and putting more rigor around data privacy? Also, anticipating starts to think more about how do we think about some of our future approaches? How do we think about this from a strategic planning standpoint, a budgeting standpoint, policies and procedures, those types of things? Level three on the maturity model is all about collaborating, right? So, are we identifying and assessing certain risks? Are we prioritizing actions that we know we need to take to try and either de-risk those situations or deal with these situations when and if they happen? And certainly, how could we potentially use technology for multiple purposes? Are there things that we can put into place today that would allow us to be in a much better situation around the whole area of data privacy? And then fourth level is orchestrating, right? We're setting objectives, we're coordinating the work that we're doing. Um, there's transparency into risk, exposure, and performance, and we really have a sense of what we're doing. Now, many of you are probably in different places, so one thing I'd love for you guys to do is just drop in the chat real quick. If you had to sort of give yourself a gut check, are you a level one, a two, a three, or a four today? And we're not keeping score, publishing this anywhere. Just curious where folks feel like they stand today. Great. So this is a place to sort of think about where you are, and whether your organization is at a one today or a four today. There's really an opportunity to do more from there. And so if I think about places to start, right, fundamentals around data privacy, there are a couple areas here that I think are worth talking about. If I can get the screen. Let's got a bunch of chat messages in here. So some folks are a three, a four, a couple fours, a couple threes. Great. So if I think about three places to start, or even organizations who maybe grade themselves a little bit higher on the maturity curve, where could you potentially, focus or add some extra emphasis going forward? So for starters, it starts with data minimization, right? Um, it's easier to have a better control over data privacy and even data security when you're minimizing the amount of data that you're collecting and using. So this all starts with some good habits here, right? Only collect data that you plan to use. Um, the opposite way of thinking about this as well is if you're not planning to use it, don't collect it. So make sure as you're, collecting data, what's our intent to use it here? And review your data collection process regularly. Like, what is the data that we capture today? Why are we capturing that data today? Do we plan to use that data either for a fundraising perspective, a programmatic perspective, right? How is it going to be put to use? And along with good data minimization about not collecting it in the first place, if you really don't need it, is also don't retain that data um, or retain that data only as long as it's necessary. And so, again, a lot of organizations to practice good data privacy not only have some rules around how they limit what they collect, but they also have a data retention policy as well. So, for example, I've seen some organizations say donors who are lapsed beyond 60 months, we no longer retain certain information about them within our systems, as an example. Again, your mileage may vary, but a good place to start here is around just data minimization, best practices in general. Second area to focus around has to do with consent management, because again, a big part of data privacy has to do with consent. Have donors, in fact, giving you consent to use and keep their data? Simplest place to start here is creating a donor data privacy policy and to actually use it. So intent here is not to just create some document and never do anything with it, let it collect dust, but in fact, create a donor data privacy policy and use it within your organization. As a part of that policy, make it clear how donors can control how their data is used. And then on the internal side of the organization, make sure that you implement easy to use processes, depending where you're from, for the donor to give, change, and remove consent. Now, in some countries and in some states, this is actually becoming more of a legal regulatory issue where in fact you do need to do these things. And so if for some reason your country, state, province doesn't fall into one of these categories today, I think it makes sense to just be proactive about it, right? Put a donor data privacy policy into place and use it. Make it clear how donors can control how their data is used. And then make sure you've got an internal process so that it's easy for a donor to give, change, and remove their consent. Ideally, in an automated type of way that isn't too obtrusive, but also something you can manage from an operational standpoint within your organization. And third, controls and compliance. As we talked about towards the outset, a lot of things around data privacy are regulatory or legal requirements. So you need to make sure that you've got controls and compliance in place. This means implementing access controls to limit access for necessary job functions. Again, very common in most technology these days, but just because you can do it in the software doesn't mean you've necessarily enabled it. So making sure, do we have access controls in place to limit the access to certain types of information only to those individuals, staff members, where it's a necessary job function to have access to that data. Providing training to staff to understand privacy policies and best practices. Again, always a good idea. So many organizations these days have regular annual training programs, or in some cases, quarterly training programs, in which people need to review certain training materials, perhaps take a test, those types of things. Same type of technique can be applied here around data privacy. And then certainly making sure that you've established the processes to comply with the applicable laws, regulations, et cetera, making sure that it's clear, yes, we have met the particular standard that's required of us. We can comply with those regulatory changes or laws depending on what the situation may be. Now, there's a couple things I wanted to put in this presentation to help you get started with 1, 2, and 3. So the first thing is I mentioned the need to put in place a donor privacy policy, right? And your donor privacy policy should all be about how does your organization collect, use, share, and protect donors' personal data. It provides options for donors to access, delete, and opt out of you continuing to have their data. And certainly it helps nonprofits to comply with certain legal and regulatory obligations. Now, the good news here about a donor privacy policy is you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. I put links in here to 3 really good examples to start with. And of course, the first example here is from our friends at Fundraising AI. So if you go to fundraising.ai/privacy-policy, you will see a great example of a privacy policy in action. There's another one in here I put as well that's a great example from the Nonprofit Alliance, and another great example in here directly from the National Council of Nonprofits. Now, I share these as good examples to take a look at, as with any type of privacy policy, those kinds of things. Anything that you create and start to use, definitely would recommend having your organization's legal counsel take a review at it. Again, depending on the country, province, state where you operate, there may be certain regulatory things you need to make sure you include in terms of that privacy policy. But just starting to have one and putting that in place today is really important for so many organizations. Since I talked about some of the regulatory pieces, wanted to note some of the main ones, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. And this has been growing over a number of years. In fact, it goes back quite a long time. So, for example, when you're dealing with data in the European Union, what you immediately come to grips with is some compliance around what is known as GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. Now, you may say, but Steve, our organization only operates in the United States. Do we really need to still pay attention to this thing? And the answer is yes, you do, because if you do have donors in your system who happen to live in the European Union and are covered under GDPR, you need to make accommodations for this. Now, it's relatively straightforward in terms of the ability to provide consent. But again, this is the importance of understanding where does your organization operate and where may you have donors from in your system. There are a number of federal data privacy laws that come into play. The two ones that I see most often come into play are HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which has to do with healthcare and healthcare related information and how that is handled. The other one that we often see come up in higher education has to do with FERPA, which is the Federal Education Rights and Privacy Act. So again, there may be some federal privacy laws that apply to your organization as well that you need to make sure that you pay attention to. And the latest, really in the past 5 years, is, as you guessed it, just about every state in the United States is developing its own set of privacy laws. A lot of this started with California, but you can see here through September of 2025, there are a number of states now that have, at a state level, their own unique privacy laws. And if you've sort of seen this play out in the past, what we're likely to see at some point is, because sometimes you can't get all 50 states to agree on anything, that what you'll likely see is something at the federal level around data protection, data privacy, those types of things. Legislation always lags the technology itself, but certainly there's a growing trend here in the US around more states enacting their own particular privacy laws. Again, some states make nonprofit organizations exempt from this coverage, others do not. So, again, very important to sort of keep track and pay attention to what's happening here on a state by state level basis. So, the last thing I want to have here before we open up for questions is, again, bringing you back to this maturity model. We talked about where you can start around data minimization, things that you can do to help do a better job around consent management, and third, things that you can do around managing your your compliance and your sort of regulatory obligations. Something I think you really should start to think about is, depending on where you scored yourself very early on in this talk, is if you're at a 1 today, or a 2 today, or a 3, or maybe even a 4, what is it that you could do? What concrete steps or actions could you take in the next 90 days, in the next 6 months, to move from a level 2 to a level 3, or a level 1 to a level 2? For me, it's all about, hey, wherever you are today, that's where you are. That's fine. But it's all about a plan of action of how do we move from level 1 to level 2, or level 2 to level 3, or level 3 to level 4. And even within level 4, the things that your organization can do to improve what you're doing from a data privacy maturity perspective. And again, would really recommend thinking about these 3 areas to start. Again, data minimization, consent management, and controls and compliance. A lot of things that organizations who are at a level 1, 2, or 3 may not necessarily be doing well today, but are things you could absolutely start to improve on and do a better job at going into the future. So, with that having been said, we've got a little bit of time left in today's condensed session. Questions, answers, Q&A from the group. If you can go into your window and enter a chat message or enter a question and answer, and we'll try and get it through a couple of these before the end of today's session. Okay, so we got a couple questions in here already. So one question was, what do you think are the top things to keep on your radar regarding privacy? I think the first thing to start is always pay attention to what's happening from a regulatory standpoint. So Nicole, your question, you're in Canada. Again, what's happening in the Canadian Parliament? What might be happening at a provincial level that are things that you need to pay attention? I almost always start there, right? Is there something that's in place already from a regulatory standpoint that we need to make sure are we compliant? And then keeping tabs on any potential new legislation, either at a governmental level, province level, state level, that you need to pay attention to. I would start there, right? What may be coming your way that is something you got to plan for going forward. Always looking at that, at least to start. And then, as I was noting, after that, it's really then again taking a look back at what are you doing today in terms of data minimization, right? A lot of organizations have sort of tried to cut back on the amount of data that they're collecting, but one thing I often see is not happening is actually going back and saying, doing a review and saying, okay, we've been collecting this type of information data for a while. Do we need to continue to collect it? And then, as I noted, the other part about data minimization that often gets overlooked is the data retention piece. How long are you retaining that data? Where are you keeping it? Where are you storing it? And do you need to implement some process or some technology in some cases to make sure you're not retaining that data longer than is absolutely necessary? So a bunch of things going on in there. Check the chat. One of the questions was around, are teams created to create data privacy? That's a great question. So it's becoming more and more common, just like you have different types of, you might have a finance committee. You may have a donor stewardship committee within the organization. Starting to see more organizations create a working group or creating an internal working committee around data privacy. To be clear, oftentimes I see they're charged with sort of data governance at large, which and inside data governance, you may put data privacy, you may also put data security. Within that group, it's a good idea to have representation from the advancement or fundraising team. I would expect you to have representation from the IT or chief information security officer team, but definitely it's a cross functional, cross departmental part of the organization where you are having multiple groups, multiple members that you've brought in that may be part IT, part fundraising, part operations. Because more than likely, it isn't just donor data and those types of things you're dealing with. It's likely you're dealing with a tremendous amount of types of data of data and data sources where this might need to be applied. Great question there. Another great question. So I fundraise internationally. Is there possibly a source where this is pooled, or do I need to manually check each region and country? Great question. So it didn't take me too long to pull together the main types of data privacy, sort of regulatory and other things that come into play. Um, I don't necessarily have an offhand resource where someone has pulled all this together. I think the way I think about it is obviously GDPR affects EU citizens. You want to pay attention to that particular piece. In the case of Canada, you may have certain privacy or privacy um, regulation that's put into place. Um, and then in the US, we're seeing more and more states just enacting their own particular legislation. Um, I think one of the things that potentially fundraising AI and others could help with in the future is at least providing a curated list of links about these different types of regulations, how to learn more about it. But certainly, what I have found is more and more organizations are leaning on their counsel, outside legal representation, to take a look at some of these different things. And the other thing I think has become more common in the past few years as well is just making it so that the technology that you're actually using makes it easier to be compliant with something like GDPR or um, regulations within California. Things like that is something to think about. Okay, I think that was the fastest 25-minute presentation of my life. But I know we covered a lot of material in a short period of time. So, Jen, thanks to you at the Fundraising AI and folks and everyone else for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Steve. I know that was a bit of a sprint in a day that is a marathon. So I also want to thank everyone who's joined us and come in and out of sessions today or stayed with us the whole day. It's a lot of information to take in, but hopefully all incredibly valuable, like Steve's session just was. So please join me in thanking Steve. And we are going to continue on with our day. We're going to collect some feedback from you all to hear what worked, what you want to learn more about, where your burning questions are in this session. So we can't wait to hear from you about your thoughts on privacy in the age of AI. So please take a moment to share your feedback with us. I do want to reiterate that you are getting the recordings. So we had a lot of questions about this at the start of the day. I think we've seen those peter off as more folks realize that we are sharing the recordings. But as an attendee of the summit, you get early access to all of the recordings from all of the sessions. So if you missed one, no worries, you're not missing out. We'll follow up with some instructions about how to access those recordings after the summit. I also want to mention, of course, our incredible Summit Plus offering in partnership with our friends at Play. This is an incredible way to take the learnings from these 2 days and figure out how to apply them in your daily work after the summit's over. So what do you do on Wednesday? Summit Plus has got you covered. It's a $5,000 value to join Summit Plus. That includes an AI immersion course, unlimited AI Spark sessions, and support through our Mission First AI community. So would love to see you there. The summit attendees for joining us today, you get this $5,000 value at $665 until September 17th. So until the end of the summit. So make sure to reserve your spot today. And then, of course, I'm going to thank our incredible sponsors who make all of this work possible. I get the joy of working with so many of these folks on a day-to-day basis. They are the people whose support makes all of this content available, possible, allows us to get some of the best speakers from around the globe to talk about the most pressing issues in AI and nonprofits. We are so grateful to all of them, including our presenting partners, Giving Tuesday and Virtuous, who have been longstanding advocates for responsible and beneficial use of AI, as are all the other folks listed here. We're incredibly honored to be able to work with leaders like these guys in the field. And then I want to also call out, we're nearing the end of our day and we're ending on this incredible panel led by Woodrow Rosenbaum at Giving Tuesday, and where we're going to talk about the fact that AI is bigger than just the tools. It's actually all about generosity and fundraising. So join us on the Amplify stage and we will see you there.